one of the first things that you're going to do when you build out that account is you're going to go to a service. That service is going to be called Identity and Access Management. And you need that. I think Coach Charisma talked to us last week about our root user. And that root user is pretty important. Coach let us know you need to not use that. After the first day when you create your account, you provide that email, and now you got a root user. You go into a service called Identity and Access Management. What do you think, Coach? Should we go there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important just to be able to go back into the console and relate this back to just our general conversation in reference to identity and access management. And there's much more than just saying who's involved, right? We've got users, we've got user groups, we've got roles, we've got policies, we've got identity providers. From an enterprise perspective, or larger business, or medium business, or small business, or even a startup, every use case may be a little bit different. Every sector may have something a little bit different. How do you know that you're doing it right? All of these different factors kind of ties back a little bit more to that AWS Well-Architected Framework tool that we showed you before. Nice. Also, the Trusted Advisor and the different distinctions and controls that the Trusted Advisor can help you in checks and balances a little bit. But Ariel will take some time and actually dive in a little.
Absolutely. So let's just do it. Coach just let us know this is a place where you can come and find users or groups of users or roles, but all of them are really powered by a policy. So I guess the first thing we should do is look at a policy. So policy, I'll choose this button here that says policies on the left side of the screen. And up here at the top, I'm going to type a word that you're probably going to type when you create your first account. And I'm just going to type admin. And here's a policy that pops out at us called administrator access. I just hit that plus button to expose the JSON. And this is just a JSON statement that tells you what this policy can do. And so I want to help you break this down because when you
hold on now. What's the JSON? You said JSON. I'm like, you lost me there, right? What's a JSON?
So JSON is a language. JSON is a language. It's a way for me to create a script. And when I use AWS is going to respect JSON in many different ways. And in one way that we respect JSON is to apply this to a policy, right? A statement to a policy to say what you can and what you cannot do, right? So what we have here in our JSON statement is our version. Now, first and foremost, never have to change that. AWS is updating the version here on your policies. And so if you ever find yourself trying to edit a policy and you do interact with this, you might find errors. So stay away from that, right? Leave it as is. But the statement here, when you start to evaluate the statement, you get the power, right? The effect here tells us if we're going to allow certain actions or deny certain actions. And when I say actions, I'm really talking about APIs. That might be a big word for some of y'all too. But application program interface are commands that you can use to interact with the applications that AWS has built out for you. And so there might be an application program interface command like start instance. And that's a way for me to start up a compute unit here at AWS with a service like EC2, right? And there's many of them out there. In the post, I'm going to make sure that I put a guide to the CLI, the AWS CLI, that kind of exposes some of the API that you can use with AWS. But in the action section is where we determine which APIs we want to use. Now, this administrator access policy is very useful because instead of identifying one API or a group of APIs, there's all APIs being indicated here. And we do that with this asterisk mark, right? Now, yes, I can go into this policy and I can start to edit this thing and I can remove that asterisk mark and I can start to be specific about what type of admin I want to build. That might allow me to go into creating my own custom-made policy. And I do that. I would just copy the JSON here and I would go to create my own policy. And from this standpoint, I'll just edit what I have here. But let's take a step back because maybe you're not at that level just yet. And so as I expose the administrator access policy again, there's another section here under action called resource. Now imagine if we had a policy where we did want to start an instance. Will we start an instance on S3? No, that wouldn't make sense. We would start an instance on a service called EC2. So we can affect this particular policy to focus on the API calls and the resources that we need to affect. But again, the first policy that we want to associate with a user is an admin user who gets access to this admin access policy. That way, they have all of this power to be able to use any action on any resource, like your root user. The difference, though, is that this user or this policy, once you assign it to a user, can't destroy your account, right? And so that's the beauty of the thing. So I think the biggest takeaway is that you're starting your journey with getting the Cloud Practitioner certification. You need to understand that identity and access management becomes a solution for you to power your principles or your identities, like users, groups of users, or roles by way of policies, right?
So last week we talked about how security or identity, IAM is what we call it, right? The acronym Identity and Access Management is ground zero, in my opinion. What I would say here is when Ariel was showing you the administrator access, there's a type column. The type is manage or AWS manage. That's also something to keep in mind, that it's a feature or a functionality as well. You can manage or customize your own policies if you want to create your own. Now, I want to say this up front. You are studying for the Cloud Practitioner Essentials exam or the foundational exam, right? With that in mind, does it mean you've got to go in here and create these new JSON statements? You've got to know how to do this verbatim? Do you need to know how to create these through the command line interface? No, not necessarily. One of the things one of the benefits here is this exam is helping you to understand terminology. It's also helping you to become more confident and familiar within the console, which is why we're showing it to you this way. If you're more engaged with the CLI, the command line interface, if that's your thing, go for it. But the way that we're engaging through this console with the API that Ariel mentioned before is the same manner, right? Whether it's through the command line, whether it's through the console, or whether it's through a software development kit or an SDK, we're engaging with these APIs or telling them to take some action, right? Part of that JSON structure that you just saw before in the permissions, but basically telling it who can do what on what resources, right? So sometimes we tend to say, tug on your ear, right? The effect, the action, and the resource. Those are the things that I want to just connect the dots and bring it back together.
Absolutely. I love that, Coach. And Coach mentioned the ear, right? Let's make it plain for you. Again, effect, action, resource, right? What's your policy listening for? That's what I like to say, Coach.
Yeah.
So good deal, good deal.
All right.
So you can use these policies to be associated again with user groups, users, and roles, right? Coach mentioned something very important. You don't have to come in here and create a policy from JSON. If JSON is in a strong suit, you can get better at learning about JSON, and I do recommend that. And just before we jump off a topic here, when you want to create a policy, here's a policy editor. As soon as I hit the create button, now I can just jump into a service. And let's use that example earlier from EC2. So maybe I want to create a policy around EC2, right? So EC2 is the service. I can bet in the resource section that are within that policy, you might find a specific EC2 instance. In this case, maybe all EC2 instances, but the actions that are allowed, then we will filter them, right? And so maybe we want to, again, start instances, right? You don't know what that means. This is some command that you can utilize to interact with the application program interface. You hit that info button. What does it do? It grants permission to start a stopped instance. If you had this associated with your policy, you get to do that. If you don't have it associated with your policy, you don't get to do it, right? And so the nice thing about these JSON policies is that you need to explicitly tell your AWS Management Console account what you want to do. If you leave anything out, AWS says we practice least privilege. So what are we going to do? We're going to deny it until you tell us that's exactly what you want to do, right? Again, just to piggyback off what Coach talked about, you don't have to be an expert in JSON. Come on over here, use the widget. You can go for either all the resources, some specific EC2 instances, but it gives you a little bit more control if JSON isn't your strong suit.
And again, just to wrap up this topic here is thinking about the fact that your organization or your own personal account has all of this already in place. This may not be something that you ever get involved with from an enterprise perspective. It may be something that a totally separate team manages for the organization, which is very common. But
Absolutely.
The beautiful part about this is knowing that it's there. So that's the deal here, is understanding that, oh, there are users. I'm one of those users. I may be assigned to a particular group that is inheriting permissions, or there may be a role associated with that. Maybe I want that role or service to be able to perform certain actions based upon the permissions that we're granting it, or an application for that matter.